My name is Juliet Vaughn, and I entered my sister's wedding ceremony unaccompanied, entirely alone. Not because I lacked someone to escort me, but because I desired to recall what it meant to stand proud without anyone protecting me. That instant, that entrance, felt like walking into a tribunal where everyone had already determined I was guilty of being a woman beyond 30, unwed, and too accomplished for my own benefit. As I stepped into the magnificent ballroom, heads pivoted, mostly for inappropriate reasons. I caught murmurs, witnessed the subtle sneers from my sister's new relatives. The ladies leaned closer to one another, eyes examining my outfit, my fingers, and the clear absence of a wedding band. One of them spoke loudly enough for those seated behind her to overhear. Poor soul still cannot locate anyone to accompany her. Vanessa, my sister, didn't even acknowledge my presence. She was too occupied posing, all smiles and jewels beside the bridegroom and his extremely proud relatives. And I wasn't part of the spectacle. I was the oversight they hoped would disappear into the rear seats. I could have departed. Perhaps I should have, but something within me insisted I remain, to confront every ridiculing gaze without wavering. Then something remarkable occurred. An elderly gentleman seated at the central table rose gradually. His hair was silver, his bearing unmistakably authoritative. I identified him from newspaper headlines. Edward Sinclair, the groom's uncle, a man possessing more corporate influence than most nations. He gazed directly at me, and then he bowed. A complete, intentional bow right there before everyone. And in that moment, every sneer, every whisper, every criticism in the room ceased immediately. Growing up in the Vaughn residence was like existing on a stage you never tried out for. My sister Vanessa was the leading lady from the moment she could toddle. Blue-eyed, golden-haired, naturally enchanting. She was the type of child relatives adored at gatherings while I, with my thoughtful eyes and constant inquiries, was politely instructed to allow Vanessa her spotlight. I discovered early that remaining silent was simpler than defending myself. My universe was mathematics, concepts, creations. I dismantled the microwave when I was 10 and constructed a self-timing oven by 14. While Vanessa rehearsed cheerleading routines, I studied advanced mathematics beneath my covers with a flashlight. My parents didn't exactly discourage me. They simply didn't comprehend me. "You'll outgrow that technical stuff," my mother remarked once, right before punishing me for missing a school dance to participate in a robotics camp. Vanessa was praised for being beautiful. I was endured for being peculiar. By the time we reached maturity, the distance between us had expanded into a chasm. She wed young, first love, grand white ceremony, residence in the suburbs. It didn't endure. Neither did the second marriage. But the third, Logan, he belonged to a different class. His family possessed property, business enterprises, and connections that commanded attention at the country club. Vanessa recognized in him not merely love, but heritage. And as usual, our parents were delighted. They organized dinners, raved to neighbors, commissioned new family photographs. My name surfaced. I was invited to the wedding because, well, I am her sister, but I was cautioned, don't make it about yourself. As if I ever had. I reserved a flight, responded for one, and arranged my calendar. I didn't have the availability, but I attended. Not for them, but for myself. The morning of the wedding, my mother telephoned just to remind me not to wear anything too bold or too professional. "You're not delivering a presentation, Juliet," she said, laughing. "This is a family gathering. Try to fit in, okay?" I grinned through the phone. Sure, I'll do my best. Naturally, I didn't fit in. I wore black, simple lines, no glitter, my hair in a low bun, understated jewelry. I appeared like myself, and I suppose in a room designed to highlight Vanessa, looking like myself was already excessive. I arrived punctually, alone. I noticed the stares, some astonished, some entertained. Vanessa's new in-laws clustered near the altar, sipping champagne and casting glances my direction. One of the aunts nudged another and murmured, "Is that the one who's unmarried?" With the same inflection one might use for jobless, or recently released. I didn't flinch. I've established companies under stress these people couldn't imagine, but I'd be dishonest if I claimed it didn't hurt. There's a specific type of pain that comes from being foreign in your own family, like you're the specter at the feast table. Vanessa passed me during the pre-ceremony photographs. She didn't even pause. "Hello, Juliet," she said hastily, not awaiting a reply. So I located my seat quietly, alone, precisely as they anticipated, except what none of them expected was Edward Sinclair. The ceremony itself was typical. Overproduced, expensive, curated for social media. Logan and Vanessa exchanged their promises beneath a floral archway the size of a garage. There were aerial cameras, a string ensemble, and a flower girl imported from some family friend's child modeling agency. It was the kind of display that proclaimed perfection right down to the guests selected for balance in the aisle seats. I remained quiet, applauded appropriately, smiled when required. It wasn't until the reception that the genuine performance began. The venue had been converted into a sparkling evening event. Crystal chandeliers, specialty cocktails, and embossed napkins everywhere. The guests were positioned at lengthy banquet tables organized like corporate hierarchies. I was stationed near the rear, surrounded by two distant cousins who both seemed amazed I hadn't brought a companion. "I assumed you'd have someone by now," one of them said, stirring her martini with a golden cocktail stirrer. "A woman like you, so accomplished." It was intended as praise. The hesitation between her words made it anything but. Vanessa was positioned up front with Logan's family. Her in-laws circled around her like she was a treasure they'd just acquired at auction. The mother-in-law, Gloria, had a face that didn't shift when she smiled, likely the outcome of skilled surgery. She hadn't addressed me directly, but I caught her looking over repeatedly. Once she leaned toward another guest and said, "She's the sister, right? The one who's constantly working." They chuckled. Not loudly. Just enough. I excused myself, headed toward the bar. I was halfway through a ginger ale when I spotted Vanessa approaching me. Her smile was strained. "I just wanted to check in," she said. "Make sure you're all right." "I'm fine. You seem, I don't know, detached." I blinked. "Vanessa, we haven't had a genuine conversation in 5 years." She gave a small laugh, the kind that sought forgiveness without uttering the words. "Well, you're here now. That matters." I nearly responded, nearly asked if she even knew where I resided now, what I accomplished, but I didn't. What would be the purpose? She was already gone before I could say anything. I returned to my table. That's when I heard them again. Logan's uncle and cousin sitting not far behind me. "Pretty but frigid," one said. "You can tell she's one of those women who weds her career." "Probably expects us to congratulate her for appearing alone," the other added, chuckling. I stood motionless. For a moment, I considered departing. I had my jacket. My vehicle wasn't distant. I could vanish, leave them with their champagne and their smugness. I owed nobody here anything. But then came the pause, that subtle change in the atmosphere. From the main table, a chair scraped backward, slow, deliberate. I turned. Edward Sinclair was getting to his feet. He wasn't ostentatious like the rest of the family. No polished cufflinks, no artificial tan, just a tailored navy suit, silver hair combed back, and eyes that belonged to a man who observed everything without needing to remark. The room hushed. He took a step forward, past Logan and Vanessa, past Gloria who looked suddenly uncertain, and then right there he bowed. A clean, full bow. Formal, unmistakable. The kind of gesture reserved for people you respect or fear. Gasps. A few camera shutters clicked. Someone dropped a utensil. I didn't move. I couldn't. Edward straightened and approached me. "Miss Vaughn," he said, voice quiet but distinct. "It's a privilege to finally meet you. Your keynote at the Zurich Summit transformed how we handle technology transitions across 3 subsidiaries. I owe you gratitude." I felt every gaze in the room shift, recalculating, reassessing. The woman they had dismissed was now being honored by the most influential man at the wedding. I smiled then, small, controlled, intentional. "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair," I said. "It's mutual." For the first time all evening, the room wasn't laughing. It was captivating. Edward Sinclair didn't immediately return to his chair. Instead, he motioned to the closest server, ordered a glass of club soda, and inquired if I would mind strolling with him for a moment. I agreed, not because I was charmed, but because I could feel the wave that moment had created, and I wanted it to settle precisely as it should. We walked out onto the venue's stone patio, away from the watching eyes and hushed inquiries. Edward moved deliberately, but with the serene confidence of a man accustomed to people waiting for him. "I meant what I expressed in there," he began. "I identified you the instant you walked in." "That's amusing," I responded, "because most of your family didn't seem to." He laughed. "They wouldn't. They only understand what they've been informed. Vanessa's family, correct? They've always impressed me as concentrated on superficial worth." I didn't respond to that. I didn't have to. Edward continued. 3 years ago, your company launched the integration framework for decentralized AI data recovery. My corporation, Winchester Group, was prepared to invest $180 million in Arrival. But your presentation in Zurich transformed everything. I blinked. That wasn't public knowledge. It wasn't. But I make it my priority to know who's genuinely changing the world behind the curtain. I examined him. His eyes weren't just observing. They were evaluating. "I assume you didn't mention this to Logan," I said. Edward smiled slightly. "Logan barely understands how to check his own email. He's a respectable enough young man, but he inherited everything. He's never constructed anything. You, Miss Vaughn, built from the foundation up." That phrase resonated with me because he was correct. While Vanessa cultivated her persona, I was constructing systems, presenting to investors, consuming cheap takeout in leased offices. I was awake at 3 a.m. writing code with no health coverage and no assurance the next funding round would arrive. I didn't just endure the market. I influenced portions of it. But to my family, that wasn't remarkable. It wasn't visible. It wasn't camera-ready. Back inside the ballroom, the mood had shifted. People who had spent the evening disregarding me now adjusted in their chairs. A few even rose when I returned, uncertain of the appropriate reaction. Gloria appeared as if she'd tasted something bitter. Logan was ashen. Vanessa was livid. She approached as I sat down. "What was that about?" she whispered, the courteous smile fixed across her face. I looked up at her, calm, distant. "That," I said, "was someone acknowledging what you never did." Her jaw tightened. "You couldn't allow me one day, could you?" I nearly chuckled. "One day? Vanessa, you've had a lifetime." All I did was appear. She didn't respond. She pivoted and walked away, heels tapping too rapidly, bouquet shaking in her grasp. The speeches commenced shortly after. Toasts, jokes, stories. I remained silent. Edward stayed seated at my table, offering quiet observations now and then, most of which sailed over the heads of everyone else. Then came the final toast, Logan's father. He wandered through the typical love, marriage, family themes, but at the conclusion, he made the error of glancing toward me. "And of course," he said, lifting his glass, "to all the family members who joined us tonight, even those who prefer the boardroom to the ballroom." There were a few snickers. Edward didn't laugh. He placed down his drink and stood once more. "I'd like to add something to that," he said. "It requires very little skill to inherit fortune. It demands even less to wed into it. But the woman seated beside me tonight, Juliette Vaughn, has accomplished neither. She's generated value where there was none. She's gained respect in rooms none of you will ever be welcomed into. So if we're lifting glasses tonight, mine is to her." The room fell silent again, and this time no one dared appear entertained. When Edward made that toast, I didn't smile. I didn't glance around for validation or recognition. I kept my focus steady on the table before me, one hand resting on the stem of my glass, the other motionless. There's something more potent than being complimented. It's being comprehended. And in that moment, I knew someone in this room finally perceived me. But it wasn't my family. They still fidgeted in their seats, avoided eye contact. Vanessa looked as if she wanted to shriek, but was too terrified to spoil her wedding photographs. My parents were paralyzed, both clutching polite expressions that didn't reach their eyes. They didn't know whether to feel proud or embarrassed. I could see it. My father attempting to recall what I'd told him 5 years ago about my business. My mother remembering that article someone forwarded her but she never read. They had spent so long reducing me to a warning tale. Don't be like Juliet. She's too cold, too ambitious, too alone. That they couldn't readjust quickly enough now that the world was applauding. But I wasn't there for their applause. Truth is, for years I had carried the burden of wanting them to see me, wanting my mother to boast about me like she boasted about Vanessa's purses, wanting my father to inquire about my latest project instead of whether I had finally met someone. I wanted them to care, but on their own conditions, not out of duty or embarrassment. Eventually, I stopped attempting. I worked, I traveled, I failed, succeeded, failed again. I lived a life with boundaries, with risk, with purpose. And in doing that, I stopped waiting for their endorsement. This wedding was supposed to be another chapter in their orchestrated family narrative. The gorgeous daughter marrying into fortune, the other one attending in black like a spectre from a different novel. But I'm not a spectre. I'm the designer of my own narrative. And if they couldn't see that, I was finished handing them the outline. Later that evening, after the music resumed and the commotion returned, my mother approached me. Her steps were uncertain, the way you walk across a frozen pond you're not sure will support you. You look lovely tonight, she said softly. Thank you, I replied. She paused, then added, we didn't know about all that. About Zurich, about Mr. Sinclair. I know, I said. We're proud of you, Juliet. I met her eyes. Why now? She blinked. Excuse me. Why are you proud now, Mom? Because someone powerful said I mattered, or because you finally believe I do? She didn't answer. Just reached for my hand and squeezed it as if that would undo decades of silence. I let her hold it for a second. Then I let go. As I turned to leave the reception, Vanessa caught up with me. I didn't know he knew you, she said. Uncle Edward. I had no idea. You never asked, I replied. About my life, my work, anything. That's not fair. No, it's just accurate. She looked away. You always made me feel like I wasn't enough. I tilted my head. Funny. You and Mom always made me feel like I was too much. That was the last thing we said to each other that night. I left alone, just as I had arrived. But this time, not a single person laughed. I didn't go back inside. While the party stretched late into the night, people dancing, glasses clinking, laughter echoing in that manufactured fairy tale, I stood outside beneath the darkening sky and watched the lights flicker across the windows. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the one who had left the stage before the show turned tacky. A few guests passed by me on their way to the valet. A couple of them nodded, overly polite. One man, a junior executive from a firm I'd acquired years ago, approached me nervously and said, I didn't know you were that Juliet Vaughn. I just looked at him. You still don't. He walked off with his wife, fumbling an apology. Edward Sinclair came out a little later, his hands in his coat pockets, his tie slightly loosened. He didn't speak for a moment, just stood beside me. The silence was surprisingly comfortable, more honest than anything said in that room. I wasn't trying to make a scene, he said finally. I know, I replied. You were trying to make a correction. He smiled. Some illusions deserve to be shattered. Then he offered something I didn't expect, a partnership, not just a courtesy or favor, but a concrete opportunity. He told me about a new initiative he was launching. He wanted my insight, my name on the founding charter. And more than anything, he wanted someone who didn't just know how to build, but how to rebuild from nothing, with vision and clarity. I didn't answer right away. Not out of pride, just reflection. Because for the first time in a very long time, I realized I had a choice. One not shaped by resentment, but by self-respect. Eventually I said, "Let's talk Monday." He nodded once and left. That was it. No fanfare, no fireworks, just mutual respect sealed in quiet. I drove home alone that night with the music off and the window half down. The wind was cold against my face, but I welcomed it. It reminded me that I was real, that I was here, not because someone allowed me to be, but because I carved out a space that couldn't be ignored and never needed their approval to exist. I never got the kind of family that clapped for me at graduations or showed up at product launches. But that night, I stopped needing them to. I stopped trying to earn what they were never willing to give. And maybe that's the lesson I didn't know I needed to learn. Sometimes the most powerful moment isn't when the world finally applauds you. It's when you realize you don't need them to. And that freedom, quiet, unsentimental, absolute, was the most valuable thing I had ever claimed for myself.